Playwright Anton Chekhov famously said, "Never place a loaded rifle on stage if it isn't going to go off." In other words, every detail must be relevant, and every setup should have a payoff. Thus, the narrative principle of Chekhov's gun was born. But it isn't always a gun. Chekhov's Whatever is a podcast where myself and guests watch a movie and try to predict what role Chekhov's gun will play. Welcome to Chekhov's Whatever. Hello and welcome to Chekhov's Whatever, the podcast that makes a game of movies and storytelling. I'm your host, Meg Mazeski. Here with me today to talk about the 2024 psychological horror thriller, The Rule of Jenny Penn, is Ellen. Welcome to the podcast, Ellen.
Great to be here.
Great to have you. Ellen is yet another one of the wonderful people I met through Lady Pod Squad. She used to host a podcast called High Expectations. Ellen, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself?
I live in New Zealand, which is exciting because that's where this movie is set.
Yes.
So hopefully I can provide a little bit of insight. What else do you need to know about me? I used to do a podcast. I've done a bit of comedy. I'm not trying to pretend that I'm going to be funny or not, but you might hear a lot of giggling in this podcast. I have a little dog. In my free time, I like to read and write and do various hobbies while listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos. That's a little bit about me.
I mean, the only reason I invited you on was for your comedy. You got to boost me up here.
Okay. I'll try and do some off-the-cuff jokes.
And the sparkling personality, of course. So yes, Ellen is joining me to talk about the 2024 psychological horror thriller, The Rule of Jenny Penn. Recovering from a stroke at an assisted living facility, a judge encounters a psychopathic patient who uses a hand puppet to abuse fellow residents with deadly consequences. This movie stars Jeffrey Rush, John Lithgow, and George Hanare. It was directed by James Ashcroft. Currently on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 71% critics score and a 55% audience score. So Ellen, did you have any expectations about this movie? As you said, this is a product of the New Zealand film industry. So was it hyped up over there? What more can you tell us?
I was really surprised that before you mentioned it to me, I actually hadn't heard of it, which is surprising because often when a film's made in New Zealand, you hear a lot about it. We had a film that came out, I think it's called Nude Tuesday, and everybody was at this resort sort of thing, and they were all naked, and they all talked in gibberish, and then they got, I think they had two different scripts for the subtitles that people just wrote based off context. So I remember that film got so much hype, and everyone was talking about it, but this one I haven't really heard anything, and I wonder if that's because I noticed it was on the streaming service Shudder. Is that right?
Yes, the horror streaming service. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if anyone here actually subscribes to Shudder from what I know, so maybe that's why. But yeah, so when you told me about it, I was pretty excited. I think it's a really interesting setting, being in a retirement home, because that makes for a lot of horror. Actually, I was thinking about back when I was listening to Indoors Women, and I think you said that you have a particular fear of crones.
I do.
Saying that? Yeah. So
yes,
and yeah, and they have this term, hagsploitation.
Hagsploitation. Yes.
So I was thinking, okay, this could go one of two ways. It could be hagsploitation, or it could be a really interesting comment on how we fear death, retirement homes, growing older. So I thought that there was so much interesting stuff in there to explore.
I think those are both very relevant and both very valid interpretations of this movie. Both apply, the hagsploitation and the thematic elements of fear of death. I do think this movie definitely draws on that rich vein of hagsploitation films. And I don't know, maybe this is internalized misogyny, but it's really only the old women who scare me.
There's not that many old women that play a big part in this film. There's a couple of side characters, but it's very much about masculinity and what that looks like as you grow older, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thinking of the New Zealand film scene, how do y'all feel about Taika Waititi? Are you just tired of him now? Do you feel like he's overexposed?
I think that we're still very proud of Taika Waititi. I think if New Zealand gets mentioned on the main stage, but I don't know if you know this about New Zealand or not, but I think New Zealand's a very gossipy country. So you either hear good things about Taika Waititi or very gossipy things.
I see.
There is that tall poppy syndrome, right? If somebody gets
Absolutely.
really successful, then people in New Zealand tend to say they're not that great. So I think that some of the gossip that comes out about him is related to that. But if a movie comes out, everyone's talking about it, everyone's watching it. So I think ultimately we're pretty proud of him.
I'm glad to hear that because I will forever remain a diehard What We Do in the Shadows fan.
Me too. I absolutely love that movie. And that is set in Wellington, where I'm from. So
Amazing. I would be proud of that too if I were you. So before we get into the rule of Jenny Penn, here is a quick overview of how Chekhov's Whatever works. This is a podcast where myself and the guest watch and review a movie that's new to us. We also play a game where we try to guess what Chekhov's gun will be and how it will play out later in the movie. Chekhov's gun is a plot element that must have a setup and a payoff. That setup usually happens in Act 1, and the payoff typically comes later in Act 3. A Chekhov's gun is also typically a concrete item, action, or person, rather than something symbolic or thematic. And finally, a Chekhov's gun should move the plot forward. We get +2 points if we correctly identify a Chekhov's gun. We also get an additional point if we correctly guess how that Chekhov's gun will pay off. And finally, we lose 1 point if we incorrectly identify a Chekhov's gun and its role. Whoever has the most points at the end of the movie wins.
good thing I'm not competitive.
The rule of Jenny Penn opens in a courtroom on the Honorable Judge Stefan Mortensen, played by Jeffrey Rush. He's distracted, there's a ringing in his ears and an insect on his bench, which he squashes. He admonishes the defendant harshly and the young victim's mother as he renders his verdict. But then he's disoriented and his speech slurs as he suffers a stroke. Flash forward, Stefan is now partially paralyzed and is recovering from his stroke in a care home. He's frustrated by everything, the constant medical exams, his reliance on a wheelchair, and his friendly roommate Tony, as played by George Hanare. He shares a smoke on the porch with another patient who, upon seeing the resident cat, comments on how the cat knows when someone is about to die and cozies up to them. Have you heard of this? Because apparently this is something that people say happens in real life, that cats can sense when someone is on the verge of passing.
Yeah, I've heard that dogs can as well. And my dog Pippi, she used to be really close with our other family dog Spike. And he unfortunately had cancer. We didn't know that, but Pippi would sniff him a lot. But maybe it's just confirmation bias. But looking back,
Right.
we thought, oh, she must be sensing something was wrong.
Oh, interesting. Speaking of weird things that I don't know if there's any basis in fact or not, some people claim that they can smell cancer on other people.
I've never heard that.
I've heard it on Reddit, so, take it with a grain of salt. It does seem like this cat in the movie, though, can sense death because, sure enough, the man accidentally spills his flask on himself and lights himself on fire with his cigarette as the cat looks on.
I didn't realize that the cat, what the significance of the cat was. But who owns the cat? Is it just like a retirement home cat that just
Yeah, I
happens
think
to
it's like the
wander
care home
around?
cat, like the
Okay.
resident cat. Yeah. This is my first Chekhov's whatever. I call it Chekhov's Portentous cat. But I will say, as soon as I made this guess, I immediately backtracked in my head. I was like, no, Meg, this isn't going to be a Chekhov's gun. It's just going to be something thematic or a callback. So I will say I didn't really make a prediction for it because immediately I was like, no, this is just foreshadowing. But I can't cheat. So Chekhov's Portentous cat.
I think this is a difficult movie because a lot of the things that look like Chekhov's whatevers are actually foreshadowing. Like one of
Yes.
the ones I wrote down was fire alarms.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I made a prediction for the fire alarm either because he's often looking back at the ceiling at fire
Yes.
alarms. But I think it's more foreshadowing that he will be backwards, that he will be on the ground, fainted, having another stroke or something like that. Yeah, so it's meant to be about what happens to you when you faint.
I think the fire alarm is also part of the recurring red color elements
Yes.
because every time he sees it, there's the flashing red light, and that's kind of like a literal warning often in the movie is the color red. So yeah, the fire detector definitely relevant to the tone of the movie. Whether it's a Chekhov's gun or not, I guess remains to be seen.
Oh, and speaking about him being a judge at the beginning, I made a Chekhov's profession.
Yes.
I think the fact that he's a judge is relevant to the plot. I said at the time, I thought maybe it's relevant to somebody he sent to jail. So maybe the antagonist is somebody
Yes.
who has been in his court and didn't like the
Mm-hmm.
outcome. Because I think the way we've characterized him is that he's quite harsh. He's not treating
Yes.
the people on trial with empathy. He's saying, oh, you put your children just as much at risk. You know, you're culpable, I think he was trying to say. I didn't pick up on the bug being squished, but that's also foreshadowing as well, isn't it? And it
It
comes, yeah.
is. I think that's a good guess about a potential defendant coming back. I was wondering that as well because the defendant in the opening scene is wearing a mask, so you don't entirely see his face. So I thought
Mm,
perhaps there might be a reveal later when that defendant comes back to enact revenge in some way.
hmm.
Yeah, good guess. Late one night, Stefan is awoken by another resident, Dave Creeley, as played by John Lithgow. Dave is peeking in through his bedroom door. Dave is known around the home because he always carries with him a strange, eyeless baby doll hand puppet named Jenny Penn. He talks to and as Jenny Penn, role playing both sides of the conversation, imitating the puppet's voice. Totally creepy.
So creepy. And the fact that she's eyeless, like the light always shines through her eyes.
Yes. I thought this was such a simple yet such an effective design for a horror villain, the Jenny Penn puppet. As you said, it's eyeless, it's often lit from behind, so you get this sort of muted light coming through her empty eye sockets from behind. It's very creepy looking, and it also symbolically speaks to the Dave character. You know, eyes are the window to the soul, so I have to assume an eyeless puppet is a soulless puppet.
Mm. And he's also got those bright blue eyes.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
so distinctive.
this isn't totally important, but do you think those were colored contacts? I think they were. They were just so
Oh,
bright.
maybe.
They looked very unsettling.
I think you're absolutely right that eyes are so important and who you're watching is very important. And we see a lot of Dave watching his various victims. Yeah.
Watching, plotting, staring down. Yeah, Dave was a very creepy character.
Speaking of, the crossover between New Zealand and Australian cinema, one of my favorite horror films is The Babadook.
Oh, yes.
And I think what it has in common is that dread about what's going to happen at night. So they live in fear during the day of what he's going to do at night. Yeah, which always creeps me out so much because bedtime is like a scary, dark time for me. Always has since I was a child.
Yeah, there's a very stark duality in this movie between daytime and nighttime. And you know
Mm.
that Dave and Jenny Penn are going to strike at night. So there is that tension of, like you said, Dave is just watching people and biding his time during the day. And Stefan can almost convince himself that there's a sense of normalcy during the day, but with this sort of looming hovering presence of Dave just waiting to strike at night, it does a very good job of building the tension.
Mm.
As time goes on, Stefan does not settle in. He only chafes all the more at being confined to the care home and can't wait to get out, which he's sure he will be able to do soon. He sneers at the company he's forced to keep. He feels like he really doesn't belong there, and essentially, he's too good for them. In these scenes, we meet a lot of the other residents that pop up again. My next guess for a Chekhov's gun is Chekhov's talking clock. So there is a blind resident, and a talking clock is essentially a big button that is pressed that then audibly says the time aloud for the blind individual. So this particular character is always pressing the button and it'll say like the time is 12:40 or what have you. So I think that the talking clock will come back in a way that Dave will accidentally press this button at some point, revealing his location to Stefan and therefore allowing Stefan to escape whatever scary scenario he may find himself in.
That's such a good guess. I had a clock as well, but it was a completely different clock. It was the clock that Tony, his roommate, is holding at the beginning. So when
Oh,
he's
the
first
birds.
introduced, the bird clock, yeah. And my guess was that it's a horror movie. It's going to be used as a weapon. But that was the one I kind of backtracked on.
You have to have the Chekhov's gun literal weapon in a horror movie. I thought that was funny too, because a good friend of mine has that exact clock, that bird clock. I was like, I know that.
I think there's a lot of clocks throughout the movie because I didn't realize that this was a test for Alzheimer's, but you have to draw a clock and have the right numbers on the clock. So I think that's why there's a lot of clocks throughout. And I think we're also often looking at clocks as well, aren't we?
Yeah, there are a lot of clocks. As you mentioned, the cognitive test for Alzheimer's is drawing a clock by hand and seeing if the numbers and the hands of the clock align. I actually learned about this cognitive test from the TV show Hannibal,
Oh.
a great show, by the way. As you said, the bird clock, the talking clock, there's many scenes where Stefan wakes up or is awoken in the middle of the night, and the first thing he sees is either the fire alarm or looking at his digital clock. So there are these constant reminders of
Mm.
time. There's a scene in which a song plays called If I Only Had Time. There's a monologue by the Dave character at the end saying how time has afforded him certain advantages. So
Mm.
I think it's underlining how time is inescapable. A lot of this movie is like being unable to escape, your fate, what's going on. Obviously
Mm.
time is inexorable, and it's obviously very closely tied with, as you were saying, thoughts of death and old age and inevitability.
I also thought of the clock as the anchor. So as the movie progresses, we find that he is getting less and less in touch with reality. Like somebody will suddenly
Yes.
switch and things will flash forward and he just didn't realize that time has passed. So I think he's relying on the clock as a way to tell him what's real or where he is or what
Hmm.
time it is. So I thought that was the other purpose of it to help him stay in reality.
I think that's a good point. Anchoring, and also for the viewer underlining how disorienting his experience is, because the time
Absolutely.
does jump so much. Yes, so Stefan is especially frustrated that the staff will not grant him a private room, though his roommate Tony is a perfectly friendly guy who even tries to engage with Stefan over literature, but Stefan, ever arrogant and academic, rebuffs him. Poor Tony. Tony was a very likable character right off the bat.
Absolutely, yeah, and characterized as such. He's a rugby player, former rugby player, which is kind of
Hmm.
like one of the greatest honors you can have in New Zealand, can't
Yes.
you?
At night, we see Dave wandering the halls, his eyeless baby doll in hand. On hand? He's brushed off. He's brushed off by the orderlies, so he takes out his frustration by cruelly mocking the other residents. This scene when he's making fun of the woman who has been waiting for her family for years, not realizing how much time has passed. He like bonks her on the head with the puppet, and he's just very mean to her. This scene, though, does a good job of establishing just how chilling and deliberate the Dave character is. I'd say
Yes.
this is our first glimpse of the fact that maybe Dave is not as addled as some of the other residents might be. He seems
Hmm.
very intentional in his cruelty.
And Jenny Penn is the it's just the cover up. Funnily enough, just before I saw this movie, I actually had never heard that Alzheimer's patients often have fake babies or fake pets to
Mm.
help comfort them. So when we're first introduced to Dave, the woman that thinks that her family in Vanuatu, she says, "Oh, don't even pay attention to him. He's one of those people who are basically gone. That's why he's playing with the baby." It's sinister, but it also
Hmm.
creates a sense of innocence, particularly with the
Yes.
staff.
This is such a trope of horror movies. It's usually deployed quite effectively, which is why it's used so often, is having something childlike and innocent juxtaposed with something evil. So, yes, they use the baby doll, I think, to great effect in this sense in this movie. Stefan is awoken once again by Dave sitting in a dark corner of his room while Tony looks on terrified. Dave stands and pours a jug full of urine into Stefan's lap. The staff doesn't buy Stefan's accusation against Dave, believing Stefan soiled himself accidentally. And Tony won't corroborate Stefan's story. He's clearly frightened of Dave. The next day, Stefan is still enraged by Tony's refusal to back him up, so he verbally attacks him, insulting Tony's former career as a rugby player, undermining his reputation, and basically calling him a washed up loser. Stefan goes on to insult Dave and throws chocolate pudding in his face. He's very indignant about the injustice of it all.
The character arc for Stefan is a lot about him coming in with his strong sense of justice, of course,
Yes.
because of his background. So his first approach is to say, well, obviously, what this guy is doing is completely not okay. And because the law is very black and white, everybody's going to be on my side. So he
Hmm.
tries to appeal to their sense of justice that, oh, well, this thing that happened to me, obviously you're going to do something about it without
Hmm.
realizing that in this world that he's entered into, things are a lot more nuanced and a lot more grey than what he's used to
Yes.
in a courtroom. And he is just completely not, just completely dismissed. And the infantilizing and the
Yes.
patronizing in the movie got to me the most. He starts saying, like, oh, this obviously somebody else has poured this urine on me. And she says, did they? And he'll say things like, he's having a go at me. He has it out for me. And then they'll repeat it back, like, he has it out for you. And it just
Hmm.
kind of gaslights him. That was infuriating to watch.
Very infuriating to watch. You definitely feel Stefan's frustration. And I think gaslighting is is such a good synopsis of so much that happens in this movie. Also, Stefan is used to his status as a judge, right? He's used to having authority wherever he goes. So to be in this situation where the social status and the social pecking order is so different than what he's used to. And in fact, it seems like Dave, of all people, has more social status than he does in this situation.
Mm.
To go from the status he had before to not even being believed and, as you said, infantilized. Yes, it's very frustrating to watch, but effective. It does a good
Yes.
job of, making you feel the character's frustration. Late that night, Stefan is once again awoken by Dave, this time by the sinister silhouette of Jenny Penn against the bright red curtain divider. I was getting Nosferatu vibes.
Yes.
Everything's Nosferatu.
The ultimate villain, to be honest. Yeah.
Absolutely. Such a good movie. So this scene is truly awful. Dave makes Jenny Penn crawl up Tony's stomach and ask Tony in a creepy falsetto, who rules? So this is the rule of Jenny Penn title come into play. To which Tony timidly answers Jenny Penn. This clearly isn't the first time that this sick little game has played out. Dave then escalates his sadistic torment, forcing Tony to lick Jenny's privates before molesting him with the puppet. Horrified, Stephen commands Dave to stop, but only succeeds in turning Dave's ire on himself. Dave/Jenny Penn then chokes Stefan and threatens him not to say a word of what he's seen to anyone. This is a really scary scene.
Yeah, the power play, especially. And I
Yes.
think a lot of the tension between Stefan and Tony is about why do you let him do this? And we find out that Tony has his reasons for tolerating it.
Yes. When I first saw the trailer for this movie, it wasn't entirely clear to me whether there was anything supernatural going on in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But by this point in watching it, it's pretty clear that there's nothing supernatural. It's just this evil, horrible man, which in a lot of ways is much scarier than anything supernatural you could throw at the audience. Scarier even than a crone, dare I say. We then get even more proof that Dave is a complete piece of shit. We see him stealing dentures, candies, and panties from another resident, and when he's alerted by the cat to a man in need of help collapsed on the floor, he simply closes the door on him and walks away. Dave can't even let the residents enjoy a dance break in the common room. He is the cock of the walk and he waltzes between the dancers, swaying with Jenny Penn as his dance partner, blithely stepping on toes and shoving people aside until he clears the entire room. Satisfied, he takes a puff of his inhaler. This is my next guess, Chekhov's inhaler.
I did have Chekhov's inhaler as well, and my prediction was that he dies without his inhaler or somehow is affected by his inhaler not working or not being
Yes,
present.
I agree. I think this is his weakness being introduced,
His
and
Achilles heel. Yep.
yes, he will either lose his inhaler or he will have it taken from him, as you said, to his disadvantage, perhaps defeating him. I liked this scene as well. It really demonstrates how Dave rules the care home with an iron hand puppet. He really just completely takes the oxygen out of any room he's in, and everyone is so cowed by him. And again, the juxtaposition of something nice and friendly with something awful. We have this friendly dance scene going on, this this nice dance music, and then just having him completely bully everyone so that they can't even have even a moment of fun. It's a very good character scene.
Yeah, I think that one of the most puzzling things about the movie, I wouldn't call it a plot hole, but it is a question, a wondering I have, is about Dave Creeley and how much he gets away with and the lack of
Yes.
surveillance. A lot of the time you think, where are the night staff or where's the security and why does he
Hmm.
have a pass that can get him into places? There's a lot of mysterious things about Dave.
There are a lot of mysterious things about Dave, and a lot that doesn't get answered, which I think is good, actually. But yeah, we can
Mm.
get to that a little later. As Tony is giving a motivational talk to a team of young rugby players, Dave mad dogs him the entire time. Stefan notices and after follows Tony to the laundry room where he's gone to hide from Dave. Stefan appeals once again to Tony for help with dealing with Dave and Jenny Penn, but Tony is too browbeaten to fight back and Stefan calls him a coward. I would say retroactively, in hindsight, perhaps Chekhov's laundry room?
Yeah,
Question mark.
yeah. I didn't pick up on that at the time, but absolutely by the end, I thought I should have put
Yep.
that down.
With no one else to back him up, Stefan attempts to file a complaint with the staff, but a complaint has already been lodged against him by Dave, no less. Dave has accused Stefan of stealing, and the staff finds a strange stuck together collage of the dentures, candies, and panties that Dave himself had stolen and planted there in Stefan's room. And the staff believes Stefan even less, asking him whether he's taken his meds. So again, this is underscoring just how unbalanced he is here and how little he is believed. So he's really fighting against being taken seriously when this is something he's never had to contend with in his life before. This is, again, I think, a common trope in a lot of horror movies. The main character isn't believed when something bizarre or odd or evil is happening. Usually it's something supernatural, like a ghost or something, and someone's like, no, you didn't see anything. But in this case, he's like, no, Dave is crazy. And they're like, no, he's fine.
Yeah, I wrote down this has big unreliable narrator kind of vibes. I know that's
Yes,
normally in a
absolutely.
literary sense, but I think Dave is casting Stefan as an unreliable narrator, but because we do see the story through Stefan's eyes, I think he does become an unreliable narrator because things start to get distorted.
There are definitely moments where Stefan sees something where you as the audience knows he couldn't literally be seeing that thing. Maybe he's hallucinating it. But I do appreciate that I don't think the movie ever super strongly suggests that Stefan is completely imagining what Dave is doing. It seems pretty unambiguous to the
Yes.
audience that Dave is in fact a bad guy and Stefan is not imagining things, and his main hurdle to overcome is being believed. Even though he is declining a bit mentally, he's not imagining what's going on with Dave, which
Agreed,
I was glad
yes.
about. For a moment, I was just like, oh, I really hope there's not a twist where it's like, and then Dave wasn't even real, you know? So I,
Yeah, I got the impression it wasn't going to resort to really overdone tropes. What I quite liked about the movie is I think doing something quite original. I think there was
mhm.
something about the way that the storytelling was done that I don't think I'd seen before. So I actually ended up thinking this is really well written and this is good storytelling.
Yeah, even though it employs a lot of used and overused tropes of horror, I do think the execution is unique.
It has a twist on it. Absolutely,
Yes,
yeah.
it subverts a lot of those tropes. And as you said, I think the writing is very strong. It does unexpected things. Stefan stumbles upon a series of staff photos going back decades and discovers Dave in every single one of these group photographs. It's never fully explained Dave's background. I guess we are
Mm.
meant to understand that he used to be a staff member here, but we don't get many more details beyond that. Like what happened, when did he suffer some sort of mental break, or did he, what's the story behind what happened to him? And I appreciated that as well. I feel like a lot of movies have a tendency or an impulse to want to over describe or over explain when it's not always necessary to the plot.
Hmm.
So I appreciated that they just let these little breadcrumbs and just sort of let them lie. So we get a little bit of texture to Dave's background and just enough to like increase the intrigue.
I think also it speaks to we know that in the outside world, Stefan had a lot of status, as you said before, but to this particular world that they've entered into, Dave actually has a lot of goodwill with the staff
Yes.
because of his, well, I'm assuming it's all real, his employment in the company for so long. And I think that, I mean, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. Dave is always going to
Mm.
be believed over Stefan because they do know him. He's a fixture in that particular retirement home. He's been there forever. So maybe he's obviously always behaved this way. He's always been a bully. And perhaps not, but whatever the case, he's become very calculated and good at covering his steps, or even to the point where he knows that people will willfully look the other way when he behaves the way that he does.
As you said earlier, you questioned at first, like, why is he able to get away with so much? And the scene does answer that perhaps the staff is more permissible because they do know him. He's a known quantity and they knew him from before, so to speak. So that scene also does a good job of answering that sort of outstanding question. Stefan has a verbal and intellectual showdown with Dave in the cafeteria, but Dave laughs off Stefan's insults and viciously kicks him under the table repeatedly. Dave goes on to torment Stefan, teasing him about his stroke and his persistent ailments. He foresees a dim future for Stefan. This is the last straw for Stefan in that moment, and he freaks out until the staff wheels him away. This was a scene that really cemented for me that I think Dave is not suffering from any sort of senility. He's just like a straight up psychopath.
Yes.
Yeah, everything he does is done consciously and deliberately, and he's intentionally being sadistic. And perhaps through being a staff member at this care home, he has discovered this endless well of victims that he can keep preying upon.
Absolutely horrible.
Oh, terrible.
I did have another Chekhov's something. I had Chekhov's paralysis. And I'm pretty proud of myself for this one. I think it was pretty obvious it was going to play into the plot. He might need to use his hand or legs later, and he can't move, or he has a sudden swelling of strength, and then he
Mm,
can fight against what's happening to him.
very good.
I did write that down right there. I'm proud of that one. But as he was getting kicked repeatedly and repeatedly, Howie said, "You need to write that down." So that's definitely going to come up later that he can't use his legs.
Very nice. Stefan's freak out in the cafeteria does him no favors. The staff is even more convinced that his mental condition is worsening, and he undergoes a battery of cognitive tests, which he does not pass with flying colors. This is the scene where he has to draw an analog clock by hand, and he fails to do so. He
Mm.
also has the, I guess, repeat the word back test, which I knew about only from Trump crowing about how he could remember person, woman, man, camera, TV after he did some cognitive tests during his first presidency, and he just kept repeating those words over and over like it proved something. Anyway, at the end of these tests, Stefan is given a brochure about the benefit of puppets. So I wouldn't call this movie a dark comedy. I think that's going too far, but there are a few moments that were very dark that also made me laugh. This was one of them. And also going back to the beginning of the movie where that man lights himself on fire with his cigarette and the cat just sort of looks on. Those were a couple of darkly bright moments for me where I just thought it was kind of funny.
I totally agree. I think there's like we were talking about before, the hagsploitation thing that draws on. I think there's a lot of dancing and jigs and playing around and
Yes,
laughing. Like, yeah, definitely a big part of it. It is a little bit camp for sure. Like carrying
it
around a
is.
doll is very camp.
I think camp is a good way to describe it. Dave and Jenny Penn continue to terrorize Stefan and Tony. This time, Stefan is the target of the rule of Jenny Penn game, but Stefan doesn't break. Stefan spits on Jenny Penn after glimpsing what he thinks is an angry expression on her face, and then Dave spits right back on Stefan and storms out. This is our first glimpse of seeing Stefan hallucinate things that aren't there. And Stefan and Tony have a little heart to heart after Dave leaves them. This is what you're referencing before. Tony says that he doesn't fight back because he doesn't want other people or his family in particular to see him in a different way. He doesn't want to be pitied. He doesn't want to be seen as a victim. He doesn't want that to be his legacy.
And I think this is when the bird clock comes back, because I think a big contrast between Tony and Stefan is that Stefan doesn't really have a family in a traditional
Mm-hmm.
sense, whereas you can tell that Tony does, that goes to various generations and they care about him, they
Yes.
check in on him, they give him gifts. And I think it's quite typical for older generations to think, oh, if somebody knows that something's going on, if somebody knows that I'm a victim, then I'll be pitied, and being pitied is one of the worst things, which
Mm-hmm.
I think that maybe younger generations don't have to the same extent. It's a lot about saving face. Yeah.
True. And Stefan, between the two of them, even though he did have a lot of social status professionally, he does say that he doesn't really have a family. And it was because of his profession that he reached a point in his life where he found himself growing to just hate people in general. So we do find Stefan in a point in his life where he's really forced to face what got him to the point he's at. And perhaps things could have been different. And maybe he shouldn't have been prioritizing just being the smartest guy in the room his whole life.
Mm.
After Dave storms out of their room, he takes his anger out on a poor, unsuspecting female resident. With a swiped key card, or maybe it was given to him, the security key, he lets her outside, claiming her family is out there waiting for her, and he watches her disappear into the night. It's not until he's unable to get back inside the facility that he realizes he had inadvertently swapped key cards with the woman and runs into the woods to find her. She's fallen into a muddy, waterlogged hole and drowned. Dave heartlessly retrieves the key card from her body and, short of breath, puffs on his inhaler. This was the moment where I was like, yes, the inhaler. I feel like I've made a good guess.
The scene was so interesting because she keeps taking the card off him and saying, mine. And he kind of lets it happen. I guess it's to get her on side and get her trust so that he
Mhm.
can, send her out into the night and probably inevitably her death. But it was just an interesting interaction between the two of them.
Yeah. I think he was like, oh, it's not worth the fight. And also, he kind of underestimates her. He underestimates a lot of people, which I think is his downfall ultimately.
Yes. But I think as an audience, we also underestimate them. And I think that they play with
Yes,
that a little bit as well. We think, oh, these people in this home, they must be senile, they must be weak, they can't defend themselves. But the interesting points in the story is when they can, and they do.
absolutely. When they get their agency back and exercise
Yes.
it. When the woman's body is discovered, Stefan and Tony know who is to blame, but they're powerless to do anything about it. This whole time, Stefan has been holding on to the hope of being released and going home, but his prognosis is not good. He's not improving, and the doctors recommend that he stay in the care home indefinitely. So Stefan is stuck there with Dave, and with no hope of escape, he spirals into despair. We get a montage of Jenny Penn's menacing shadow playing across the red curtain night after night, and a huge Jenny Penn looms over him, ominous and omnipresent. I believe in the screenwriting world, this is what they call the dark night of the soul moment of the script. So, yeah, they really underline that with the montage.
Dark Knight of the Soul. I've never heard that before, but I can definitely think of movies where it happens. The one that comes to mind is Midsummer. She has that dream where everyone drives away and leaves her. Is that also a similar kind of thing?
Yeah, it usually happens right at the end of Act 2 and before Act 3. So I don't remember where that happens in Midsummer, but it definitely sounds like a Dark Night of the Soul type of situation.
Where we can see that anxieties playing out about what might happen next.
Yes, when all hope seems lost.
Oh, I see.
Speaking of moving into Act 3, before we do that, we are going to take a quick commercial break to hear a few ads from our sponsors. And we're back. Dave and Jenny Penn go on to kill yet another resident, and Stefan resolves to put an end to their reign of terror. Stefan steals a card wallet with a security key from one of the staff and uses it to sneak into Dave's room while he's showering. Inside Dave's room, he has a dark red carpet, red drapes, there's red light. I mentioned a bit earlier that this movie really employs the use of red to underscore certain things. I'd say it's kind of just sort of representative of Dave. It's like when you see the color red, you know that Dave and Jenny Penn are going to be showing up soon. And I think pretty literally and straightforwardly, it's just kind of like a warning to the audience and the character that something bad is going to happen.
Also, the bedroom is meticulously clean, and I think we associate that with being very calculated or perhaps a
Yes.
psychopath. They often have like a cleanliness thing or a sense of order in their surroundings.
Very orderly. And again,
Mm,
it just further proves that Dave is seemingly in complete control of himself.
absolutely.
Inside Dave's dresser, Stefan finds Jenny Penn, and for a moment he thinks he sees eyes in the doll. Stefan also finds Dave's store of inhalers. When Dave returns to his room from the shower, he notices his room has been disturbed and he finds the card wallet. Instantly suspecting Stefan, Dave confronts him in the common room and throws the wallet in his face. He's on to him. In a show of dominance or celebration, Dave puts on a song called Knees Up, Martha Brown. It begins to dance a jig and sing in front of Stefan and the other residents. You mentioned this scene earlier. What do you think of it?
I think it's just fantastic acting. I think that
Yes.
John Lithgow looked at this role and thought, this is a villain I want to be. I can tell that he's just having the best time playing this role.
He's so menacing. And you're right. He does
Yes.
completely embrace the role to a very successful degree. Like, I believe that he is this deranged Dave person. It's quite the character. I feel like he could go down in horror history as a pretty memorable horror villain.
Absolutely, yeah. I loved it. To be honest, he's horrible. Some of the things that he does I thought were just unforgivable and had like a real physical reaction in my body.
Yes.
I don't think we've quite covered the bits yet that really upset me. But when parts like this, you almost feel won over by him, and that's the best kind of villain, right?
Yes. That's a great way of putting it. You are so entertained that you feel bad about it. You're like,
Yes.
but also you want to look away at the same time too. It's very captivating, but you kind of feel bad about it.
Yeah.
I watched this movie by myself because my husband is not a big horror movie fan. And as this scene was playing out, I just hear from upstairs my husband saying, "What the fuck are you watching?" I'm like, it's a horror movie, can't you tell? But I think that really speaks to how good this scene is. It's
Yeah.
very strange. Even if you're not watching it directly, my husband was like, "What?"
I was watching it with Howie because, funny fact about Howie, I think that a lot of people would consider this like a red flag or a beige flag. He talks through movies and TV shows. He just can't stop.
Oh
So
no.
I thought actually you can't you don't want that. Okay. Well, I'm like, this is my cross to bear. It's fine. But I thought that would actually really work to my advantage because he will point things out that happens in the movies a lot.
Yes.
One quote of his that I wrote down was, "Turn some lights on, brah," which is true.
It's true. It's true. It's a very dark, very
Well, he's
dim
walking into
movie.
darkness. Who knows what's hiding in the
Yes.
darkness?
So much stuff to trip on.
But yeah, it was really helpful to have somebody else's perspective because I think I get very tangled up in the themes and the, kind of metaphor, whereas he's quite literal. So he was
Yes.
very good at saying that inhaler's going to come up again. So speaking of the inhaler.
Yes. Speaking of the inhaler, as Dave is doing his little jig, he becomes quite short of breath. So he reaches for his inhaler, but he finds that it's completely expended. Now he's struggling to breathe and he stumbles toward his room, desperately pawing through his stash of inhalers, only to find they've all been exhausted by Stefan. We get a little flashback to Stefan just puffing out the medicine of all the inhalers. Dave collapses on the floor. Dead? Question mark. With Dave seemingly out of the picture, the entire home breathes a collective sigh of relief. There's a real vibe shift among the residents. Even Stefan sleeps easier and shares a few smiles with Tony.
At this point, we've seen the inhaler 3 times. So speaking of Howie, he said the inhaler's not coming back again. I guess it's that rule of threes.
Rule
If
of three.
Yeah, if they were to show the inhaler again, they would definitely be overdoing it. So this is kind
Yes.
of the peak of when the inhaler's going to play into the plot. That's what I assumed while I was watching it.
Howie's and you are absolutely spot on with that.
Yeah.
In Howie's defense, I grew up watching Mystery Science Theater 3000, which its entire conceit is commenting and making silly jokes throughout a movie. So I am very guilty also of talking throughout movies.
I actually host movie nights with my friends for the intent purpose that we talk through it and riff on the movie. So
Amazing.
movies we've watched a lot of times, like Twilight, for example.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite things to do.
Speaking of New Zealand movies, I had a birthday party that was watching all of Lord of the Rings, and commentary was definitely recommended throughout.
That is such a great movie to watch for your birthday.
Yes.
I don't know if you mentioned this a little bit before. So when Stefan was going through the room, he finds mostly things that would be just normal and in place, but he also finds a photo of a beach. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it said something about sick leave in the 70s. I want to say 72. It said the name of the beach, sick leave 72. I feel like maybe it breaks the Chekhov's gun rule because at its core, Chekhov's gun is really speaking to the idea that for the sake of efficient storytelling, any sort of detail that you introduce should be relevant and important to the plot. And this photograph, unless I missed something, it does absolutely nothing for the plot. It
That's
doesn't
what I
progress the
thought
plot.
too.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the film is about regret. So we were saying before that Stefan said, "Oh, I just started to be cynical and not trust people, and that's why I didn't get close to people and get a family." I think this beach photo is about these were the times that I took a break from my work. And I think a lot of the time we hear, when you're old and your deathbed, you're not going to think about all of the hustling you did. You're not going
Uh,
to think about the work that you did. You're going to think about the memories and the good moments.
mhm.
And the real horror of this film is what if you get to the end and the time runs out and you didn't do all the things you wanted to do or enjoy your life in the way that you should have? So I
Yes.
think that's what the photo represents.
So even Dave has regrets, you think?
Yes. And I think actually that's the underlying point of the film. Dave wants power, and the
Hmm.
role of Jenny Penn is Jenny Penn represents his desire for power. And that's how
Yes.
he gets a one up on all of his victims by saying, "Who rules? Jenny rules," right?
What's that phrase? When you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. So Dave loves the rule of Jenny Penn so much that he never feels like he's working. So therefore, he doesn't have regrets anymore. So the home seems to think that they are free from Dave, but it's the calm before the storm. Stefan is abruptly awoken as he's being wheeled at breakneck speed down the hall and into the community room by a deranged Dave who is cackling madly. Dave dumps Stefan onto the floor and proceeds to terrorize the blind man and his cognitively impaired wife, beginning to undress her. Stefan struggles to his feet and manages to stop Dave by striking him with his cane, but the effort proves to be too much and he passes out. Was this the scene you referenced of greatly disturbing you?
Oh no, actually, it was a different
Oh,
scene. But this is the scene in which he does regain his strength.
he
Because we
does.
saw earlier that he pulls himself out on the fence,
Hmm.
and Dave is looking at him. So that, I guess, is also playing into the paralysis, the Chekhov's paralysis. So he's saying, "I
Hmm.
still have the strength to get up." And so he does get up and then whack him with the stick, but all of it takes all the strength out of him to do that. So I think the paralysis does play in there.
Yes, he's in the moment where he really needs his strength. He's able to summon enough to defeat Dave, at least for the moment. When Stefan wakes up, he is alone in a solitary room. I liked this scene because so much of earlier parts of the movie was Stefan really wanting space to himself. He really chafed against having Tony as a roommate, having any sort of roommate. We've seen him and Tony grow gradually closer. And then in this moment where everything is looking so bleak for him, he finally gets what he thought he wants, which is being solitary, having solitude. But then the
Mm.
camera pulls away and it just keeps pulling away to an impossible extent. Like the room just keeps stretching and expanding. And it really underscores just how disorienting this sort of liminal space is, and how all along he thought he wanted to be by himself, but that wasn't at all what he needed. He needs his friends. He needs Tony.
Absolutely agree. And I think the latter half of the film is a lot about found family and
Yes,
alliances and how important other people are, how relationships are really at the end of it all, the most important thing in our lives.
absolutely. Yet again, this is a recurring theme. Stefan is rudely awoken by Dave, who regales Stefan with a story about how he once saw the judge give a speech at a prestigious black tie event. Dave asked himself what he himself had done with his boring life, but discovered that time had given him certain advantages. And even in this place, in this care home, he himself is full of life because he hasn't stopped playing. This kind of speaks to what we were talking about before. He
Absolutely.
he abandons any idea of being a normal person, let's say, and he's like, I'm just going to play, quote unquote, with these residents. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to have my power play. And this seems to be what is giving Dave his twisted purpose in life.
Yeah. Is this the bit where there's that poster with the cat that says
The
we
cat,
what is
yes.
it? We don't stop playing when we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing.
Yes.
Yeah, which is a phrase and an expression which I don't know about you, but I think it's quite ubiquitous. I see it
Yes.
everywhere. So having it play into the plot, I thought was quite clever because it plays on our own
And
sense of reality and our fear of time and aging.
our fear of motivational posters.
Exactly. They can always be manipulated by a psychopath
It's
because
true.
that's who their target audience is, perhaps.
uh,
And I might be wrong about this, but I think he says, I thought like he was in his 40s when he saw Stefan on the podium as a judge,
yes.
and he thought I can make something of myself. So there's also that sort of thing like, oh, when you're in your 40s, you think you have so many years to go. But I
Hmm.
think he's making meaning of all of that time he buried into, because I think he says here that he was a cleaner, that he buried into
Yes.
being a cleaner at the retirement home because it has, as you said, afforded him that sense of entitlement and power at the back end of his life. So yeah, I think a lot of it is about making meaning of your life towards the end in a
Yes.
twisted way.
Even Dave can be right twice a day.
But also the thing I said about how his profession would play back into the plot. Dave wasn't somebody that was in a court case. I think that's the point, that Dave didn't really lead a very eventful life. So to go to jail and to have a court case, that would have been a massive event in his life, but that's
Hmm.
not what happened. He just happened to be there because he was working. And he remembers Stefan being important and being a person with status. So that does kind of circle back round to what we see in the beginning, where Dave is in a position where I have the power, things are going to go my way. I have the sense of justice, which has all been upended now that he's in the retirement home. So it all kind of ties together, I think, quite neatly there.
And I do think that is a more interesting resolution to these ideas than, as we were speculating earlier, perhaps someone who the judge had brought a sentence down upon, perhaps a former defendant would resurface and try to take revenge against Stefan. It could have been very easy to make that person Dave. And I do think it is more interesting, as you were saying, to speak more to the ideas of it, of who has power, who gets to have power, how is that power used for or against other people, which is way more interesting than just having an aggrieved defendant show up again.
I absolutely agree. And I think cleaners are a profession where it's so essential, but often people who work in cleaning jobs are treated as like they're not really there.
Hmm.
I remember being told about this biography by a cleaner, and he used to clean, I think, our local university here. And two academics met each other in the hall, and they said, "Oh, are you the only one left here?" And he said, "Yes, it's just the two of us." And the cleaner was standing right there in the hall, overhearing the
Oh,
whole conversation. So, your personhood is taken away.
yeah.
So it's an interesting role that they gave him as well. Just thought that was an interesting choice as well for his former life profession.
Yes. That guy should have Goodwill Hunting their asses and, how do you like them appled them?
Yeah,
It's
if
a
it
verb
was a
now.
movie, he absolutely would have had like his one up moment, eh? But no.
Yes, alas, real life cannot be
No.
always so cinematic. uh, Dave rounds on Stefan and subjects him to the rule of Jenny Penn once more. But this time, Stefan does break and give in with a tear rolling down his face. Once again, that giant, monstrous head of Jenny Penn dwarfs the room. Another Dark Night of the Soul moment. I don't know if there's allowed to be more than one in a movie. Physically and spiritually diminished, Stefan is returned to the general population in the cafeteria. Tony is heartbroken by what he sees, and full of righteous anger, he performs a defiant Maori haka before Dave. Pained, Tony breaks down, crying. This was a really powerful scene.
Oh, absolutely. I think that was the parts of the plot which got me the most. I think just prior to this, Dave is using Jenny Penn to tell a joke about Māori people on the moon.
Oh,
And he
yes.
says something like, one Māori person on the moon is a problem, two is a problem, every Māori person on the moon is a problem solved. So this plays a lot into New Zealand's particular problem with racism and tension between Māori being the indigenous people and the settlers, which is particularly prevalent with Dave's generation. And the haka later on is you do a haka as like with a sense of prestige and to show your strength and to, show that you're there. So I think it's a part in Dave's character arc where he's saying, I'm not going to stand for what you're doing anymore. But what's really heartbreaking about it is that he can't do the haka with the same sense of confidence. He messes up the haka, remember, and it kind of peters out, and then he gets taken away by a nurse. So even his attempt to show his strength is ultimately thwarted. I don't know if that word, brought down a
Yeah.
peg or two by the nurse intervening and not letting him. I think that if I was in that position, unless he really needed me to intervene, I'd say absolutely he can do his haka, he can
Yeah,
express himself.
absolutely.
And I think that culturally, it's quite a faux pas to interrupt somebody when they're
Hmm.
performing a haka, but of course, I think she thought that she was helping him, but it was such a moving scene. I think even more moving than when Stefan relents to Jenny Penn
Yes.
because it had such a uncomfortable racial dynamic. Oh, one more thing I wanted to say was Stefan also spends a lot of his time quoting poetry and
Hmm.
great speeches. At one point, Dave says, You will be eventually broken. And I think the hint of hope in the movie is that he says some sort of quote to say, Oh, well, all men are eventually broken, which kind of gave me a sense of relief when he did relent to the Jenny Penn thing because I thought he is relenting now, but I think there's a sense of hope that something
Mm.
better is going to be coming. But Tony calls him out for this and he says, Why are you always quoting dead men? What do you really think? What do you really feel?
Yes.
And that's when they have their kind of heart to heart and open up to one another. But I think Stefan always relying on the words of other great men or
Hmm.
writers is a really interesting part of his characterization as well.
It's such an easy shorthand for him to try to show his power and status. He's like, look, I'm intellectual. I can quote things. But as Tony says, like, what does that really say or prove or demonstrate? And when Tony does, try to express himself physically with the haka and is unable to, even though his performance is perhaps not exactly what he imagined, it does seem like Dave is shaken by this. He doesn't have a smart retort. He doesn't have something cutting to say. But we can see in his expression, there's so many scenes, like we said, where he's just looking at people. And there's so much he emotes through his look. And in this scene, the way that he looks at Tony, he does seem for a moment, at least a little concerned that he does not have full control over Tony anymore.
Absolutely agree. He looks shaken. Yeah.
So we're really coming to the breaking point here. The tension is really boiling over. We can tell that something has to give between Tony and Dave. There's a scene where there's a string quartet playing for the residents, And the whole time, Dave is just staring Tony down. We're reaching a literal crescendo here with the music. So, knowing that Dave will come after him that night, Tony flees to the laundry room. Sure enough, Dave tracks Tony to this hiding place, but when he opens the door, he's surprised to see Stefan there. With Dave distracted, Tony tackles Dave and pins him down while Stefan smothers him with the bed linens. Dave struggles, beating at Stefan's back with Jenny Penn until finally he falls still, dead. Yay.
I don't know about you, but when I watch these films where there's such a sense of dread, I suppose this is what it's meant to do, but I just feel such a relief.
Yes.
I think in life I could never murder somebody. In a film, it's like a completely different context, right? Like you think, oh, thank God he's gone. Thank God he's dead.
Yes.
It just seems like this menacing, unrelenting presence that will just torture them until they have no choice but to end him in some way.
Absolutely. And there were a few moments in this movie where I was pretty unsure
Yes.
that there was going to be a happy ending to this movie.
I
Like there
was
were several
thinking that
moments.
too.
Yeah, I was like, I can totally see this movie ending on a downer. I can see this movie ending with Jenny Penn being victorious, you know. I was quite concerned, especially in that scene when Stefan does relent to the rule of Jenny Penn. In that moment, I was like, uh-oh, is this movie really going to bum me out?
Yeah, because that scene I thought, okay, I know that everything's going to be okay because I remember the quote he said about how all men can be broken. So that gave me a sense of hope. But I agree with you. I really wasn't sure where the film was going to go throughout it. And in this laundry room scene, we were talking before about the flashing red light. There's a flashing red and green light.
Yes.
And I thought that means something for sure, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I think particularly the green light is very important in this scene because the green light is really emphasized after Dave is dead. So I think this, if we're going to talk color theory, this is our literal signal to the audience that they've defeated Dave. Green is good, red is bad. The green has prevailed. We now know that that danger has passed. Also, just previously in this scene, when Dave is heading to the laundry room, he passes by the cat in the hallway, the cat that is always there preceding a death. So, of course, that is foreshadowing that someone's going to die. It is, in this case, Dave's death. But also often when we've seen the cat show up throughout the movie, it is usually in a green light. So I think that the cat is also meant to be this benevolent presence. And I think maybe a little bit more literally, green can be representative of an exit or an escape. So whether that's through death or in this case, Stefan and Tony are able to escape Dave by killing him, and then the green light prevails. And very, very literally, there are scenes where there are green exit signs illuminating the hallways. But I think it can be taken on a more, I guess, metaphorical level as well.
Yeah.
I need to get my color theory people back on here.
Yeah.
I've had several color theory guests. It's not my forte.
I listened to your Smile 2 episode.
Yes.
And Jen was very into her color theory.
Yes.
It was fascinating.
I'll have to ask her if she has any thoughts on this movie. Stefan and Tony share a tender, bittersweet moment of victory. Stefan gently smooths down Tony's hair and wipes away his tears. I thought this was very beautiful. I like that at the end they have developed a friendship and respect for each other despite the horrible circumstances under which this friendship was forged.
Yes.
And a real partnership in a lot of ways.
Yeah, just as I was saying before, I think one of the major themes is that safety in numbers.
Yes.
Relationships are kind of the most important, and one of the biggest oversights in Stefan's life is that he didn't put more care and attention into his friendships. And so a big development of his character arc is that he can open up to Tony. But I think it's actually only through these extreme circumstances that he can let Tony in.
Yeah, that's true. Stefan then throws Jenny Penn onto the outdoor fire pit and watches her burn. Later, in the common room with Jenny Penn no longer casting her shadow over the home, all seems well, or at least back to normal. We see Stefan playing a game of backgammon with another older gentleman, and he seems to be enjoying himself. Then the cat comes over to Stefan. They look at each other, and the blind man presses the button on his talking clock. We cut to the end credits over the song Misery, 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 and the image of Jenny Penn slowly melting away over the fire. The end.
Brilliant last title card, like or whatever you call it,
Yes.
lasting image from the film. Just I think that's often a really strong point of horror films. Like I'm thinking of the end of Pearl, where Mia Goth as Pearl is just staring at the camera,
Yes.
smiling and getting increasingly pained in her expression. And like the final image of the horror film leaves you with is often very strong.
A lot of horror films these days like to end on that unflinching shot, that long
Mm.
shot. Yeah, that's really interesting. I was listening a little bit to the lyrics of Misery, Misery, Misery as it was playing, and it made me wonder, do you think Stefan has a little bit of regret for vanquishing Dave? I get a slight sense that he found some purpose in his rivalry with Dave and Jenny Penn, and maybe he misses the Battle of the Wills a little bit. What do you think? Am I completely misinterpreting
No,
this?
I agree with you. I think it's a bittersweet ending. And I think that, yes, a big part of his character arc is that he opens up to people more, but another part of it is that he sees himself as a just and moral man, and he had to become
Mm-hmm.
completely immoral. So his entire sense
Mm.
of self has been undermined, which is kind of the tragedy of the film in the way. And it's interesting that you said the cat was staring at him. Do you think that means that he is also close to death?
I think it does. And I rewatched this scene a couple times because I really couldn't interpret Stefan's expression when he's looking at the cat. I was like, is he smiling a little bit? Is he grimacing? So I really couldn't tell what Stefan's reaction was to seeing this forebearer of death as represented by the cat. I'm like, is it a relief to him? Is he worried? I really couldn't tell. There seemed to be a lot of ambiguity there.
I think that it's too clever of a film to end with just a happy ending.
Yes. I think that it is, I think that it's fitting that we are left with the implication that Stefan is going to die.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that was The Rule of Jenny Penn. What did you think of this movie overall?
I really liked it. I don't know about you, but I'm on Letterboxd, which is also apparently created by New Zealanders as well. Just a little
Oh,
shout
I didn't
out.
know that.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I went on there and I gave it 4 stars out of 5 because I thought it was
Mm,
really good. But I saw a lot of people, and this is why I always do my review before I look at everyone else's. I found that there was quite mixed reviews. Most people giving it about 3 stars. So I think people are a bit, they don't they don't extremely like it.
I feel, I think I feel pretty ambivalent about this movie. Actually, discussing the movie with you, I like it more,
Oh,
having gotten your
okay.
perspective. Yeah, I feel like you brought out a lot of interesting points about the movie and I think redeeming points of this movie. But my first impression after I finished it, and when my husband asked, what did you think of the movie? I paused for a moment and I said, well, it was pretty fucked up. I think that's still true. And it did give me a lot of like gross, icky, bad, not enjoyable feelings. But, you know,
Absolutely.
that doesn't mean that the movie is bad. I would say objectively, this is quite a good movie. I just don't know if I can say that I enjoyed it because it was so cruel and disturbing at points. It's one of those movies where it's like, I can see what its strengths are and I can tell that it well made, very good performances, very good writing, but it's not a movie that I would recommend to everyone without reservations, right? You know, I'd recommend it
Yes.
to very specific people. And it's
Yes.
also a movie that I probably won't rewatch again just because, you know, it's not a happy movie.
No, I think it's asking a lot of the viewer. Like, you have to
Yes.
spend time with people who are filled with dread. I think dread is the
Hmm.
main feeling that I had watching the movie. If they're not dreading the very real threat of Dave, they're dreading deteriorating or death.
Yes.
And I think that thing again about what I was saying about the cleaner, that people want to ignore the cleaner. It's an essential job, but people don't want to have to think about it. I
Hmm.
think that's the same with retirement homes. I think we know that they provide an essential service, but we don't
Yes.
want to think about them. And I think it's interesting that the staff, with the exception of Dave, don't really play any major roles in the plot or the story
That's
as
true.
such.
I think that probably speaks a lot to maybe why I didn't completely enjoy this movie, because I do like to not think about death as much as possible.
Yes.
So this movie did make me uncomfortable, I guess, in a good way. But, as you were saying, that's kind of the whole point of it. It's speaking to death. It's speaking to the inevitability of it. And also that, death isn't a simple thing. And often for a lot of people, what precedes death is a time in life where you lose your independence, you lose your agency and autonomy. And in a lot of ways, that's even scarier than dying. And for the Stefan character, he really fights against losing his cognitive abilities. His whole life has been, look at me as this intellectual academic man. And he still, for a lot of the movie, has a very sharp mind. But any glimpse he has of losing that, that's what really, really frightens him more than his deteriorating body. So yeah, it's a serious movie.
Yes, yeah. I also think another reason why I think ambivalent is a really good word to use, why some people would feel ambivalent about it, is the sense of suspended disbelief that you're asked to ignore a lot as a viewer. Just why does he
Yes.
have that key card? That's
Right,
never
right.
explained.
Yes.
Why is the staff just turning a blind eye all the time? Why isn't there night staff around? Why isn't there cameras
Hmm.
everywhere? There's a lot of things that make me question the plot. I think you could call them plot holes for sure.
That's a good point. I do think that, I don't know if fairy tale maybe isn't the quite word, but it almost
Mm.
has like a fairy tale-esque quality. Like there's a very larger than life thing going on in this movie where, as you said, definitely could describe those as plot holes, but they're so ancillary to the power play dynamic that's going on between the characters that it really doesn't matter what the answer to those questions are. Kind of in the same way, like it doesn't really matter when Dave went off the deep end or why he chose Jenny Penn as his avatar. These are all things where it's like, yeah, it's in the background of the movie and it could be interesting to think about, but I don't think the movie necessarily, like lives or dies by it.
I completely agree with that. I mean, it didn't bother me, but I could see how it would bother another viewer who wants to have their questions answered.
For sure. And especially if someone goes into this movie expecting a more conventional horror movie, because, more conventional horror movies are a little bit more basic in their plot. So those types of plot holes would stand out more. I also really liked the cinematography. I mentioned that one scene where the camera keeps pulling back and the room seems to go on impossibly far. There's a lot
Mm.
of little like tricky shots like that. Although I'd say more often the shots and the framing really emphasize a sort of like cramped quality or like
Yes.
claustrophobic quality. Also, a lot of stuff is very off kilter. You were saying that Howie was telling people to like turn on a light. like this movie is all like very dim, and all of that works together to create this dread, like you said, all these liminal spaces, and it really feels like a purgatory in a lot of ways, very
Mm.
purgatorial. They're just sort of caught in this space between spaces.
And often the camera is pointing at the ceiling, not where the action actually is. Particularly, I
Yes.
think when the staff were taking him away, it would be you'd only see his head or the top of him, and most of the shot would be
Mm.
in the ceiling. It's really interesting.
Or when Dave is wheeling him away, I believe that shot starts with just looking at his feet and in the wheelchair and the floor, the carpet rushing by. So it's
Mm.
all very disorienting in a very intentional way.
Yeah, and he even says, "Oh, this is my room. Why are you still going?" He doesn't even realize that Dave is the one that's behind him.
Yeah. And, we talked about this already, but I do want to underscore just how good the performances were, both by John Lithgow and Jeffrey Rush. Such good dueling performances, and they're both such accomplished actors. This was what initially drew me to the movie, was seeing the cast. I knew that I could expect something interesting from both of
Yes.
these people.
And I also think I would be really interested to know how John Lithgow got introduced to the script or
Yes.
anything because he must have read it and thought, oh, I want to go all the way to New Zealand to film this
True.
very
Yeah, yeah.
strange film. So there must have been something really compelling in the role to him.
Did you see the season of Dexter in which he was the villain of the season, the bad guy of the
No, I
season?
didn't. Sorry, unfortunately.
I think he really shines in these villain roles. He really seems to embrace them. Maybe it's all because of Third Rock, for so long he
Yes.
played the affable dad character, the sort of buffoonish sitcom dad that he's like, I'm gonna do something fucked up now.
But also, I think he brings that sense of camp and fun that he's so used to bringing to his roles. And I think that he also is an actor that as soon as we see him on scene in a movie or a TV show, we think, oh, this is a familiar face. This is somebody I like. So I think he's also playing against type, which I love. I love when
Yes.
actors play against type. I think Hugh Grant is my favorite one. He's spent most of his career being just this like handsome, lovable kind of idiot. But at this
Yes.
tail end of his career, now he's playing villains and he's singing and he's dancing and he's playing Oompa Loompas, and it's just
Well,
so, such a fascinating career arc, eh?
it's true. Yes. See also Heretic, another previous episode of Chekhov's
Oh,
whatever.
I haven't had a chance to
Evil
watch that
Hugh
movie
Grant.
yet. I can't wait to see that one though.
Do you have any thoughts on John Lithgow as Dumbledore in the new HBO Harry Potter series?
Oh, I suppose that's quite fitting as well, isn't it? That just that thing I said, the familiar, the kind
Yes.
of warm fuzzy thing that he brings. I remember talking to a friend and I gave them a short story of mine and they said it's very comforting, isn't it? And I remember
Uh-huh.
thinking, no, I'm a serious writer. I want you to see all of these like themes I've written in there. I want you to think I'm like a proper, great writer. And he said, no, it wasn't an insult. It's because the vibe that you give off or the thing that you bring to everything that you do is
Mm,
that you have a real sense of comfort. It's a good thing. And so
yes.
I think that is something that John Lithgow probably brings to his roles is an underlying sense of comfort. So yeah, I think that that would be a good role for him. It's just like how some actors just spring, you're a character actor or you're an evil
Yes.
villain. I think that even outside of our control that we bring a particular persona to everything that we do, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. I can't imagine a person who is unfamiliar with John Lithgow up to this point who doesn't have some sort of preconceived idea of what John Lithgow brings. But I am imagining some hypothetical person who watches The Rule of Jenny Penn and this is the first thing they've seen John Lithgow in. And then they go and watch Harry Potter and they're just like, whoa, wait a second.
He can do everything.
Actors playing wildly different roles. Who knew? It's almost like it's their job.
And I think they get to a certain status point where we do pigeonhole them and we like Pedro Pascal,
Hmm.
for example, we just always think, oh, he's gonna be like the lovable underdog, the hero.
Hmm.
I think if Pedro Pascal played a villain, that would be a big whiplash.
That would be great.
It would actually be great.
Yeah.
Because he's such like a kind, warm face, very much the same sort of thing. So yeah, wow. Somebody should get in touch with Pedro Pascal and play this episode to him.
Please. Pedro Pascal,
Have him
please
on
be on
the
my podcast.
podcast.
I think that he is on the verge of being overexposed, of being in too many things, but he has not reached that point for me yet, and I would love to see him as a villain.
Agreed. He's in like SNL and like commercials now and everything.
And The Last of Us and the Fantastic Four and a bunch of things. Yeah. Fine by me.
I always think though, give different actors different roles. Like I want to, see actors have a variety, but of course that never happens. Oh well.
Yeah, going back to John Lithgow and Jeffrey Rush and perhaps like why did they choose these roles? I do think, as you said, people get pigeonholed, especially the more movies they've been in, and therefore the older they get. So it makes sense to me that these two veteran actors would be looking for something different, perhaps at the tail end of their careers. John Lithgow even said that he thinks that Dumbledore might be like the last role he plays, and I'm like, what are you
Oh.
talking about? Like, you're not that old, but it does give a little insight into maybe some of the choices he's making in the projects he decides to take on.
I don't know about if the same thing happens for male actors, but I know that for women actors, the older you get, the less roles you get and the less interesting roles.
Yeah, you're just
So
always a
maybe the same
grandma.
sort of thing happens for yeah, but this is such interesting roles for older people, and that's why I think the film is so original. We so rarely see a film set around old people and their stories. But there's so
Yes.
much richness and depth, particularly because there's so much like wealth of experience. I think a lot of the movies that are about older people are aimed at other older people to go to the cinema.
Yes, that for sure. And also, often a movie that's about older people, I'd say often tends to be comedy or just played for laughs. I'm
Yes.
thinking particularly about Cloud Atlas, where there's a whole side plot about a man in a retirement home. And it's purely just like for laughs, for comedy. And I do think it's infantilizing. We do this thing where older people get infantilized and then they're just seen as, oh, isn't that funny? Isn't that cute? Whereas, they have this rich interiority of life. And yeah, I don't think that gets explored as often as it could in cinema.
And I think the cruel irony of it all is that we're all going there. We're all going to become that identity at some point.
Yes.
So I think the more we move towards humanizing older people, maybe kind of the less scary it gets, you know?
Yeah.
This movie, one of the best things it does is, like you say, give them their agency in the end and allows them their stories and their humanity. And the more that we can do that, maybe as we get older, it might be a little bit less scary to think, oh, we're now the invisible person, or
Yes.
as you say, like just somebody to laugh at or somebody to infantilize.
Maybe someday I will not be afraid of crones and my own impending old womanness. All right, that's going to do it for the rule of Jenny Penn. Now it's time to get into the game and see who won. First up, we had my guess, Chekhov's Portentous cat. And even in the moment, I was like, this isn't anything. It is foreshadowing. It is a callback. It's not a Chekhov's gun. So I'm going to subtract points from that for myself. Next, we have Chekhov's fire alarm. This was a guess of yours. Kind of similar. I think we're in agreement that that was not a Chekhov's gun.
Yes, yep, foreshadowing, but not a Chekhov's gun.
Agreed. Next guess was Chekhov's profession, specifically Stefan having been a judge. Remind me again what your prediction was for this.
My prediction was that the antagonist was going to be somebody who was formerly in one of his court cases.
That's right. So again, I would classify this as probably not a Chekhov's gun. It did speak to development of the character, his motivations. Didn't really have the setup and payoff in the way that you would expect of a Chekhov's gun. Would you agree
No,
with that?
I do agree with that, yes. And my prediction was incorrect.
Subtracting points for that as well. My next guess was Chekhov's talking clock. Again, something thematic. As we were talking about, there are lots of references to time in this movie, the passage of time, how time helps anchor Stefan. But in this particular case, the Chekhov's clock was not, in fact, a Chekhov's clock. You had a very similar guess, Chekhov's bird clock. Any other thoughts on that one?
Not, not a Chekhov's clock at all. It was not used as a weapon. It's just more fitting into the theme of clocks, I think, and family.
Yes. We both guessed Chekhov's inhaler. Hey, we got one right.
There's so many symbols in this movie that could be Chekhov something, but they're not. It's a confusing
It's true.
movie.
But you know what? Kudos to us. We get full points for that one. And finally, Chekhov's paralysis, which I would say did also have a setup and a payoff.
I think so too, yep.
Absolutely. Okay, if you'll give me just a moment to tally our points and we'll find out who won. Beep, boop, beep. All right. I had a score of +1 point, and Ellen, you are our winner with +3 points. Congratulations.
Oh, really? Thank you.
Yes.
I thought maybe because I put so many wild guesses out there, I might lose. But that's all right. It paid off in the end. I give a shout out to Howie, who really helped me find all of the Chekhov somethings.
Ellen, it has been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. It is so nice to chat with you again, and I'd love to have you on again sometime.
I was actually going to say that as well. I had such a fun time. And watching the movie and trying to pick up on all of the different hints that it was throwing out there, it was super fun. It's a really good way to watch a film.
And I'm also really glad that you weren't mad at me for making you watch this movie, because I often feel bad about making my guests watch weird or bad movies. And I was like, oh no, is Ellen going to be like, why did Meg suggest such a fucked up movie?
I was reluctant when I first went into it. I thought, oh, am I not going to like this? And then I was surprised how much I liked it.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it. Well, in the meantime, Ellen, where can the listeners find you online, or what would you like to leave the listeners with?
The only real thing I'm working on at the moment is I'm trying to do more of my writing. So I've got a blog. It's Brogues or Death. Brogues is in the shoes, blogspot.com.
Awesome. And I will include a link to that in the show notes, so be sure to check it out. And until next time, thanks again for listening. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Chekhov's Whatever. Go to chekhovswhatever.substack.com to follow along with the podcast. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a positive review. You can also find video clips and full audio episodes on YouTube, so be sure to like and subscribe at Chekhov's Whatever. And finally, you can send email to chekhovswhateverpodcast@gmail.com. All right, let's end this show with a bang.